So this is my longtime friend, Neil Wertlieb. Neil is, among other things, having a 40-something year career now as an attorney. He also,
Yes,
within the last couple of years, became an expert witness. And in my view, there is a lot of benefits to having executive presence in his role as an expert witness. So I wanted to loop Neil in and get his perspective. He's someone whose presence I've admired for many years, and I think that he's found a tremendous outlet for that skill. So let me just hand it over. Neil, as I mentioned, you're an expert witness. I wonder if you can just take a couple of minutes and describe what an expert witness is or does.
sure. I'd be glad to. Thank you, Tracy. An expert witness is somebody who gets involved in a case, a litigated case, and ultimately goes in and testifies in front of a judge or a jury. If you ever seen the movie My Cousin Vinny, Marissa Tomei ultimately takes the stand. She's the girlfriend of the lawyer, and she is the expert witness that wins the case basically for his team. So I am Marissa Tomei. That's what I do.
So one side or the other hires you as like a independent expert to bolster their case.
Yeah, basically, as lawyers get heavily involved in their cases, and they understand ultimately how they want to present it, what the issues are. They look for experts, and sometimes they're required by law to have experts in order to prevail in their case. So there may be experts, multiple experts on both sides of the case, and we could spend dozens of hours preparing to be a witness at a trial. But ultimately, if it goes to trial, and most cases don't even end up going to trial, but if and when they do go to trial, people like me who act as an expert witness, we get sworn in and we basically present our thoughts as an expert in a relatively narrow area that's relevant in a case and explain what we did to prepare and why we think basically certain issues should be resolved a particular way, or that a lawyer made a horrendous mistake that they should have known better, or a deal was done in a manner that was so unusual that nobody should have expected the result that one side is expecting. By the way, those are the two areas where I serve as an expert witness, kind of attorney ethics and business related matters, which is why I mentioned those two. But it's sitting sitting on the stand and offering my opinions to a judge or a jury and being confident in my conclusions and my opinions is essentially, part of the case. If I can't sit there and share confidently my analysis and conclusions, I'm not helping, and my role is not fulfilled. So it's kind of a core part of what we do as expert witnesses.
Got it. Okay. I appreciate you going into that detail. So when we were talking before this interview, you talked about several different aspects of your job and how executive presence is necessary in each of those aspects. So I wonder if you can break it down into those parts and where executive presence is important in each one of them.
So it starts with an interview by an attorney, somebody who reaches out to me and they want to see if I'm available, if I'm interested, and most importantly, from their perspective, whether I have the qualifications and can add to their case. And that's a conversation that I have with attorneys almost daily on potential new matters. And it's often challenging because I'm thinking on the fly. I don't have time to prepare. They don't share anything with me. They just somehow reach out to me. Maybe I'm recommended to them, or they find me on Google or wherever. And I have to share with them my thoughts off the top of my head in a way that may be helpful or useful to them. Sometimes they're not terribly helpful to their case, but they're beneficial to them in how they're thinking about whether to proceed, how to proceed. That's kind of the first place where I would say executive presence is essential. The next step is when I'm being deposed. And just for clarity, that's when I go usually in a conference room and I'm questioned by the attorney on the other side, who is really looking for weaknesses in my position. Lack of skill, lack of analysis, jumping to conclusions, maybe being biased because the opposing side is actually paying me to be there and be involved in the case. And, as we talked about earlier, I often feel like those attorneys on the other side, if they're doing their job right, they want to humiliate me. They want to rip me apart. They want to demonstrate that I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Sometimes they'll do that at the deposition. Sometimes they save that until trial when they have the opportunity to cross-examine me, where they take the floor and then they can ask those questions because they've been sharpening their knives for months and they're ready to just jam them into me.
They really want to undermine your expertise.
Exactly. And that's their job.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last part is, as you say,
when I testify at the trial, which is, and there, I think executive presence has two roles. One is I'm there on behalf of the lawyers who've hired me. They put me on the stand, they ask me questions, and I express my opinions. That part is fine, and I need to share with the audience, whether it's a judge or a jury or both, that I'm prepared, I have the experience, and I've reached conclusions that I can support and I feel comfortable with. That's half of what happens in court. The other half is then the opposing counsel then gets up with their sharpened knives and try to stick their knives in me. So those are the three places, kind of the initial conversations with the lawyer, the deposition, and then when I actually show up at trial, where I'm speaking to the decision makers, basically.
okay. So I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to ask you to cut this part out and ask you to be a bit more concise.
Yeah, okay.
So in each of those parts of your role as a expert witness, you both have to manage your mindset and your emotions, and you have to project a sense of common expertise and confidence. And maybe I'm stepping on the answer that I'm asking you about, but what do you do in each of those stages? What do you do in each of those stages to project a sense of executive presence? Or let's say on the last stage, what do you do to protect yourself emotionally from those knives that are coming at you?
Part of it is recognizing that I'm just doing my job. And more importantly, that the attorney on the other side is just doing their job as well. Their job is to make me look bad, make me look like I don't know what I'm talking about. And they'll do everything they can to make that happen. And I can't be offended by it. I can't be put off by it. They're just doing their job. Sometimes they're really good at it, and it can be, a little trying, but you got to just take a deep breath and appreciate they're doing their job. Maybe they're doing a great job and you appreciate them even more, but then you move on.
Okay, so part of what you do is the framing is, hey, this is not personal. We're each just doing our jobs. Part of it is frankly having the confidence that you know your stuff so that you don't feel like you're going to be steamrolled. What traits do you display that gives the other side or the jury or the judge the sense of your executive presence?
I think in this role, and I appreciate that it may be different when you're running a company, for example, but in my role as an expert witness, it's showing calmness and confidence
Hmm.
and not being pushed over the cliff, not getting upset. And when somebody when the opposing counsel asks a good question, recognize that's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. Thank you for raising that. Let me reflect on it. And when you do that and you appreciate that they're really just doing their job and not offended by it, you have a certain level of clarity. And maybe there's a great response that would not have occurred to you had you panicked, had you let them, kind of get under your skin, and felt like there was no possible way to live through this. So just feeling comfortable with yourself that you've done your homework and you're doing the best you can. And the other side is doing the best they can.
Is there anything that you do before situations where you're going to be tested to bolster your sense of calm and confidence?
Well, of course, I do what I can to prepare on the substance.
Mhm.
I try to give a lot of thought to questions that they may pose. But beyond that, there's not a lot to do to prepare other than emotionally and feeling like I'm ready for this.
Okay.
And just to give you a partially silly answer, one of the things that I almost always do when I'm being cross-examined or when I'm going to be cross-examined or deposed, I wear socks that have a Tyrannosaurus Rex or a shark on them because they give me that strength. And it takes the seriousness. I mean, it may sound like I'm joking, but I really do wear those socks. And for me, it takes the seriousness out of the situation because I got these silly socks that give me, that bolster my confidence because I'm a shark or a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
We're going to get into that in class 6. Damn it.
I've ruined it all. Sorry.
No, I realize that it's entertaining to you and it does help make this help frame it in your mind as this is not life or death.
Well, exactly. I mean, there's a certain level of seriousness involved in any case that's brought before, a judge or a jury, and there's a lot at stake, and there's a lot of stress that can come from that, and it's being thrown at me, and I experience it to some degree, but I do what I can to survive that or get over it and not let it impact my presence, my thoughtfulness, and my clarity, and being able to think about my socks and the power that they give me, as ridiculous as that sounds. It takes away from the what could be kind of a painful encounter.
I think it's really an interesting. I will add it to class 6. Last couple of questions. Is having this kind of presence something that you've worked on over the course of time with any intention?
I think there are elements of it that I've developed from my very first days as an attorney. Like, for example, being passionate about the work that I do. As a young attorney, right out of law school, having the opportunity to work with more senior attorneys on their matters, demonstrating a passion for the work and a desire to work with them and conveying that to them, I think was hugely beneficial because whether they were conscious of it or not, they wanted to work with me. I was in some ways their go-to person. And I don't think it was because I was good at what I was doing. I think, because I didn't really know what I was doing. I was right out of law school. But I think because I was engaged and I was paying attention and I was happy to be there, or at least that's what they intuitively picked up from me. I saw that work. And whether, honestly, whether I felt it or not, sometimes you have bad days. I always tried to convey that. And I think that was maybe the beginning of how I developed what I guess is executive presence today. I conveyed a desire to be there, and to learn and to get experience.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. People want to be with other people who want to be there.
Right. That's exactly right.
Aren't making them feel bad about them having to do it or do whatever they do. I think you have a particular approach to executive presence, and I think that there's a number of different recipes to executive presence. I think people can convey executive presence in different ways. This is somebody that I think does have substance, to somebody that I think that I do want to follow, but they might do it in a different way. You interact with a number of other attorneys, experts in their own field, judges. Just curious if there's anybody that sticks out in your mind, or maybe more than one person that sticks out in your mind, who, for you, they convey executive presence, and what do they do?
Oh, it's an interesting question. One of the things that comes to mind, let me see if I can answer your question in an indirect way. But one of the things that comes to mind is everybody's different. Everybody approaches their work situations, their experience, whatever it is, in a totally different manner. And you got to find what works for you. I think that a mutual friend of ours who happens to be a judge here in Southern California conveys executive presence. He sits on the bench. He runs the courtroom. And he is, as you know, one of the nicest, most sincere, genuine, generous people I know. And he does that as the judge, as the ruler, as the commander in the courtroom. And he's not ever yelling at anybody. He's not, there's no nastiness there. There's just imminent, intense pressure, not pressure, non-pressure. There's no pressure, in other words. There's infinite patience. That's what I meant to say. I think that is a quality that really works for some people. And our friend the judge, I think, is a great example of that.
If I was going to ask one of your clients or one of your former partners, what are the traits that Neil has that contribute to his executive presence? What do you think they'd say?
I'd like to believe that they would say things like he listens, he takes into consideration what other people are thinking, what they're sharing. He's considerate. And then he does what he thinks is the best path forward. Even if he's alone in following that path.
Are there any particular behaviors they might notice? They said they notice listening.
Yeah. Listening, not interrupting, taking into consideration what other people say,
yeah,
but still using my own judgment. and not be necessarily caving to other people's, input, advice, direction.
Yeah. Uh, are there any circumstances where you lost your executive presence? Basically you lost the thread, or one of those knives stuck. And if so, did you recover that presence, and how?
So, yeah, I mean, that happens fairly often where one of those knives may stick. One of the first cases where I testified as an expert witness, the attorney on the other side had clearly done his homework. I forget, this is years ago, so I forget exactly what the substance was, but I had testified about something, and then it was his turn to cross-examine me, and he asked me, "Are you involved in some publication?" And I had just been appointed as like the editor or general editor of this publication. I was very proud and said, "In fact, I'm the general editor of that publication." And then realized I just stepped in something because he smiled and then showed me a piece of paper that had highlighted language in it that was from the book, the treatise that I had recently become an editor of, that said exactly the opposite of what I had just testified to. It could not be worse, frankly, as an expert witness, to testify to something and have the attorney on the other side in cross-examination hold up something that's basically my words contradicting what I had just said. And my first thought was obviously being panicked and realizing, oh, I'm worthless here now. And I may never get hired again as an expert witness. This is the end of my, this part of my career. And something almost magical happened. I don't know how I flipped the switch. I don't know that this was me intentionally doing this, but I sort of had an out-of-body experience where I was not the victim having knives shoved into me. I was just another attorney sitting in the room. And I looked at this guy, in my out-of-body experience, and I truly appreciated what he had done, that he did his homework. He presented it really well. He demonstrated his knowledge, and he did the best he could possibly do at embarrassing me and making me no longer credible in front of the judge, which I thought was brilliant. And not feeling like the victim in that short moment, I actually smiled at him in appreciation. And I think it threw him off because he wasn't expecting that I would smile. But it also calmed me down. I didn't feel under attack. I didn't feel like, that this was necessarily the worst thing in the world. I don't know how I survived it, but I calmed down. I took some deep breaths, and then I took a closer look at what he showed me. And I realized what it was actually saying was the exception to the general rule is, and then it's the sentence that he highlighted. And that was more than enough for me to twist it around and demonstrate that I knew what I was talking about, and he was trying to trick me. And then he lost all credibility in front of the judge in that case.
Wow.
It was almost magical, but I wish I could say I planned it out, that I was prepared. It just happened. But part of why it happened was I didn't take it personally. He was doing his job, and I appreciated what a great job he had done. And by not feeling offended or personally attacked, it gave me the calmness to actually come up with the right response, which worked perfectly in that instance. And that lesson from, I don't know, a decade ago, I think has only improved my work as an expert witness.
What I think is actually really interesting about the way you describe your experience, where you've got these opposing counsel trying to come out with you with knives, and you reflect on, hey, they're just trying to do their job. And there's a lot of people in my class who struggle with communicating, particularly with senior management or sometimes with peers, to communicate effectively. And even more so in their circumstances, the people on the other side are actually not their opponents at all.
Right.
They're just trying to do their job, and they actually see you as on their side. So being able to have that mindset of, hey, you know what, let's not take it personal. We're all just trying to do our jobs here is
Right.
a helpful mindset to have. Are there any circumstances where you didn't come up with that brilliant answer and you were just left hanging and or did have your credibility undermined in front of the judge or jury, or saw it hanging in the balance and had to gain it back?
There are situations where that's not possible.
Hmm.
Right. I mean, it's I in that particular instance, I happened to notice language that rectified the whole situation. Had I not found it, I would have had to live with the result. And I think that's probably the case in a lot of situations. I mean, I've had bosses that have been more demanding of me than I felt like I was capable of responding to, or expecting things from me where I couldn't deliver, or I didn't feel confident that I could deliver. But I think it's helpful to look at those situations as learning experiences and not as like a slap in the face.
Failures.
Yeah, it's not failure. It's a learning experience. You learn from, those kinds of incidents. Sometimes things don't go well. What can I take away from that? How can I improve my working relationship with my colleagues or my boss, and convey that I want to learn. I want to do better. What can I do? And maybe that's a conversation you can have with somebody at work. Maybe it's not. But it's at least a conversation you can have with yourself. Don't blame yourself. Learn from your mistakes.
Really interesting, helpful sharing of your experiences and your wisdom around it. Anything else you want to share?
I'd love to share with your students that I think they have a great instructor in Mr. Tracy Wilk.
Oh, I've already explained that to them. They've already clearly figured that out. I appreciate that. All right. I'm going to come back to one question.
Yes.
I wonder if you can explain what, and actually I'll ask the question after I do the setup. Explain a bit more concisely what a expert witness does. Sound good? All right.
Okay, I'll try it.
All right. So you're an expert witness. I wonder if you can concisely explain what an expert witness does.
Expert witnesses are retained by attorneys in litigation to testify on a particular subject and basically support the case that the attorney is trying to build. Ultimately, it's somebody with the proper qualifications who comes in at trial and testifies in front of a judge, and possibly a jury, and expresses their opinion based on their qualifications and their experience in a manner that's helpful to the case where you're engaged.
Okay. In your view, why is executive presence particularly valuable as an expert witness?
When I take the stand and I get sworn in and the questions start, my job is basically to sound like and be convincing in that I know what I'm talking about, that I have the right experience, that I've done my homework, that I've done the analysis, and I'm speaking from a position of confidence, but not overconfident, not egotistical. But I've looked at this. This is my background. I can reach the opinion that this guy screwed up, or that guy violated his fiduciary duties based on my experience. And it's really important, in front of a judge or a jury, to be the person who's persuasive, who sounds like he knows what he's talking about, and comes from a position of that executive presence, I guess.
And you're saying, and you have to continue to convey that in the face of opposing counsel trying to undermine your presence, your reputation, your expertise.
Exactly. I mean, the primary role is testifying in response to questions posed to you by the attorney who's hired you, who's prepared you, who understands exactly what you're going to say. That piece generally is much easier. It's when you're cross-examined by the other side and you don't necessarily know what they're going to ask. And if they're really good at their job, they're going to try to embarrass the hell out of you. And having the calmness and the confidence to be able to respond to that and not be upset by it, not take it personally, I think is essential to being successful in this kind of role.
Got it. So I can imagine, it being important to have executive presence, even in the absence of opposing counsel, being in a courtroom situation, a potentially high pressure case, trying to communicate complex concepts in a fashion that the judge and or jury can understand. And then on top of that, having someone come in and try and knock you off your confidence, your sense of your demonstration of knowledge, or undermining your story. That's where executive presence, as you say, really is important.
I think you put it really well. I mean, that's it. That's exactly what it is. And being very clear and direct. And sometimes, the reason why experts are hired is because it's a complex area. It takes somebody who's kind of been there, done that, and to explain it in a way that people understand. And that's enormously helpful.
Excellent. Is there anything else we should cover?
Not that occurs to me. I think I'm fine with it. Hopefully you got the sound bites that you want. I feel bad if I didn't give you what you needed. But I hope you got the right snippets from